They were the first generation whose childhood came with an audience, who grew up being watched before they knew who they were. The algorithm was there before they understood it. The comparison started before the self was stable. The ranking began before they had anything to rank. No generation before them grew up like this. Not even close. There was no frame of reference. No one had been here before. The result is the most anxious generation ever recorded, the most medicated, the most diagnosed, and the most honest about their own pain. It is easy to call this generation oversensitive. Snowflakes. Too online. Unable to cope. That reading requires ignoring what they were handed. This generation grew up in an environment specifically engineered to produce anxiety. That is not weakness. That is physics. The platforms they grew up on were not designed for their well-being. They were designed for their attention, at any cost. Nearly half have a formal mental health diagnosis. More than 8 in 10 are either diagnosed or living with something unnamed. They are not broken. They are the first people to grow up in an environment that no nervous system was built to handle. Growing up digital did not just give them access. It shaped their identity, their self-worth, the wiring of their entire inner world. The feed became their mirror. The likes became their feedback. The scroll became their silence. Understanding what that built changes how you see yourself, from product of a broken generation to survivor of a new one. Gen Z, born roughly between 1997 and 2012, are the first generation to have smartphones during their most formative years. Their childhood included a global pandemic, climate grief, school shootings normalized as part of life, political instability they were old enough to watch and feel. They grew up measuring themselves against every person their age on every platform, in real time, without end. The 2025 research found nearly 80% had felt addicted to their phone, spending over 6 hours a day on their screens on average. Their identity did not form in private. It formed in public, being watched, being responded to, developing under the pressure of a live audience. Other generations had private adolescences. Their awkward phases belonged to them. Gen Z had none of that. Everything was visible. This is not a moral failing. This is what the environment did to a generation that had no choice but to grow up in it. If you grew up online, what is the thing it took from you that you did not know you were losing? Tell us in the comments. Someone needs to hear it. Self-worth in the digital childhood was not built from within. It was assigned from without, in numbers. The comparison never stopped. Not at school, not at home, not at 3 a.m. The feed brought everyone's highlight reel into every quiet moment. The research is consistent and damning. More screen time, more comparison, more anxiety, more depression, more hopelessness. For young women, the numbers are starker. 91% said social media negatively affected their mental health. This is not vanity, it is architecture. When the environment is built to make you feel insufficient, feeling insufficient is not a personal failure. The exhaustion of the digital generation is not laziness. It is the cost of being always on, always performing, always available. They never had a private self to rest in. The performance self and the private self were never fully separated. The anxiety does not have an off switch. 40% feel stressed or anxious most or all of the time. The sleep is disrupted. The concentration is broken. They skip social events to recover from a world that never actually paused. But here is what makes this generation extraordinary. 68% took a deliberate social media break, the highest intentional disconnection rate of any generation. Have you ever taken a break from social media for your mental health? What made you do it? Tell us below. Someone needs to read your answer. But this generation is also the bravest about their own pain of any that came before. 42% are currently in therapy. They broke the stigma. With their words, their openness, their refusal to pretend that everything was fine when it was not. No previous generation talked about their anxiety, their depression, their sense of being lost. Not like this, not out loud. That honesty is not weakness. It is the first crack in the wall that every generation before them maintained at great cost, and the generations that come after them will not have to maintain that wall, because this one named it. The hidden cost nobody names is grief, for the childhood they saw other generations have, for the private adolescence that was not available to them. The cost of growing up in a performance culture, learning to present before they learned to be, and now having to find the being underneath the performance. The cost of inheriting a world on fire before they were old enough to help put it out. The climate grief, the political despair, the future anxiety. And yet they did not choose cynicism. They chose therapy, awareness, community, the most hopeful response available. This is not a story about a broken generation. It is about the first people to navigate conditions that were genuinely unprecedented. The anxiety was not their failure. The performance was not their choice. The exhaustion was the price of growing up in a machine. And what they chose to do with it, seek help, break stigma, choose honesty, is the most courageous response this situation had available. If you grew up digital, if something in here finally named what the exhaustion was actually from, drop one thing in the comments. What is the hardest part of having grown up online that nobody ever names? Someone in the comments needs to read exactly what you write. Subscribe. Every week this channel names what your generation was handed that you never asked to carry. This channel is for everyone who grew up in conditions nobody named for them. You have always belonged here.